Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Today is, of course, Saturday, January 7th, 2023. Happy New Year to all of you out there. And today we are talking about an interesting, often not easy to see aspect of some of the major events that have come through the borderland. Operation Paperclip was a very interesting thing happening in the both waning days and end of World War II that led to many important things with the space race, among other things, but also the human factors of it, particularly the children of those that were brought here from Germany, and, well, the education and the part of it, talking about the book Educating the Enemy Today. You can, of course, find us live on air, online, live streaming on KTSMradio.com, and with a full video on the El Paso History Radio Show Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as on some of our partner Facebook pages and groups, including Remember in El Paso When. And this is, of course, the place where we say Texas history begins in El Paso. And we do have a history moment today at the top of Hour 2 from documentary filmmaker Jackson Polk, talking about some interesting other aspects of our history that will be have again start of Hour 2. But of course, joining us here in studio right now today, we are joined by Jonna Perrillo, the author of Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. And of course, beyond being an author, you are also a professor at UTEP of English education, correct?
That's correct. Thanks so much for having me, Andrew.
Absolutely happy to have you on. Saw some of the, or at least mentions of the talks that you were having on around town about this, and made me further interested in wanting to speak with you about it, because we have talked previously on this program about Operation Paperclip, some of those aspects of it, and of course, White Sands Missile Range that could be seen as being more or less directly involved in, still being around from that. There's a lot of evidence of that, but the human factors of these things, I mean, it's tempting in history to often talk about big movements, important people, monumentous occasions, but it's almost more important to talk about the everyday experiences of people and what kind of happens around that, because nothing comes out fully formed from the ether. There are so many things that take a lot of effort, input, or logistics around it. And so the fact that what you're focusing on here is one of those, again, there's not like monuments to it. It's not something that can be immediately seen in the landscape, and so it can be a little bit harder to do and harder to understand without kind of an in-depth investigation and review of it that you have done.
Yeah, I think that's true. Each of the 118 scientists who came to El Paso were allowed to bring up to 4 family members. That was the stated rule, although many brought more. Some had more than 2 children. Some brought their mothers. So the families, I argue in the book, were actually essential to the operation. They were essential for keeping the scientists here. And they were essential for putting a pleasant, happy face on the operation. The children in particular did a great deal of PR work for the families.
Interesting way to put it that way. So what we're talking about, Operation Paperclip, for those who have maybe missed previous discussions or just not familiar with the topic we are discussing here, that of course World War II, as within any wartime, you see often vast and hurried advancements in technology, because of course if you can do a better job and bring better weapons to the battlefield, usually so much faring better. And that was very much a focus of the Nazi regime within Germany, was of developing science in a lot of different ways. The specific aspect we're talking about here was essentially within rocket technology, and that could have been seen in a couple of ways, particularly in the V series of weapons, the Vengeance weapons, V1 and V2. The V2 being the most significant one we're talking about here, because those were everyone's seen a Duck Dodgers cartoon. That's essentially that pattern of rocket, that kind of pointed but vaguely oblong shape with the fins at the bottom, and it was used as essentially super long-range artillery during actually World War II, but there was a lot of interest both on, of the major world powers that emerged from the conflict, both the USSR and the United States, on that technology that, again, you can draw through lines through to the space race from how that was developed and how that moved forward. So Operation Paperclip specifically was trying to essentially capitalize on and control, to an extent, that scientific knowledge and understanding and competency, and that's where the people end up coming in. This wasn't just about technical documents. This was about making sure that that kind of continued development would be happening, primarily here, United States-wise, but also in our region, as opposed to Soviet Russia.
That's right, yeah. In the closing days of World War II, both the United States Army and War Department and Soviet analogs raced to get these scientists who created the V2, the weapon that you were talking about. I think it's a great point. It's a very iconic kind of rocket.
Oh, yeah.
To build similar weapon for the U.S. And Fort Bliss was chosen as the site for those scientists to reside and to work. And to go to your earlier point, yeah, they tested the missiles at White Sands.
Yep.
So it was really a double base kind of operation in that sense.
I mean, because sure there was McGregor Range present in the area before, but I mean the whole idea of, well, there's a whole lot of empty land out here. I mean, there's part of the reason that like the Trinity site was within the larger region here, and the Los Alamos labs further up in New Mexico. So there's a lot of this kind of development ish. You can kind of, that's the way I think of it anyway, within the larger region. But we're talking about specifically with like in our broadcast area today about where the Operation Paperclip, a lot of those scientists were brought, including, some pretty famous names for people who have paid any attention to like the history of like rocketry and missile development, such as, Werner von Braun, those kind of scientists coming through here. So we are talking about them having been a part, or at least developing on behalf of, the German regime previously, and now being brought here to say, okay, you're going to keep doing that kind of work on our behalf. So that's some of the baseline history we're talking about here, but that's not, I mean, it's certainly a part of, but not the main part of your focus here, because you're looking at essentially the circumstances surrounding them. Because, yeah, it's one thing to say, hey, you're going to come work for us. No, you can't bring anyone with you, so it's kind of push come to shove situation. Not that there was a whole lot of, hey, do you want to work for us or the Russians? Your choice. That wasn't really the conversation, the way it went down, but they kind of the way it's interesting that you put it there about the people surrounding them were a key factor in both keeping them happy, frankly, because someone who is being forced in duress, I mean, there are examples from within Germany in that point in time of sabotage for those that were being forced to do it. I mean, there was even, the ways they were being forced to produce it within concentration camps, and let's just say if you were focused on work quality solely, that was not the best result that you might want there, beyond the, of course, insurmountable human toll that came along with it. But then also, like you said, just the logistics around having those families here is its own story entirely.
Yeah, and I guess what I want to say in response to your point was, and I talk about this a bit in the book because I did quite a lot of research out at the National Archives, where there is a huge collection of government surveillance on the scientists who were brought here, and Army surveillance. The scientists' relationship to Nazism was various.
Of course.
And there are things that are provable, like that someone joined the NSDAP in 1933, or before it was, required. Or that everyone else in their family went to Argentina after the war. So there are things there that can create speculation. There are, of course, we hear about other kinds of complicity that are really about careerism. And I talked to 20 former children in the course of writing this book. And, they talked about their parents' varying relationships to it. So, but it's not really about their parents in the sense of what I'm interested here is the children. I think the parents' relationship to Nazism is important only so far as this was the deal that the United States made with, that the United States chose at the end of the war to recruit these scientists. And they chose to recruit them in many ways more easily than they chose to allow Jewish refugees into this country. I talk about that a bit. My interest is not so much in the scientists, but what the scientists and their families revealed about American society and politics, starting here in El Paso.
Because, yeah, of course, them being brought here, it was not just about the work because, and again, the part that you focus pretty much primarily in this, I mean, again, the title of the book, as we've popped up here, is, of course, Educating the Enemy, which is a provocative title here because, of course, even beyond ideology, there was, this was a countries that were at war with each other. And this is, again, in the aftermath of that, a kind of, okay, how do you reconcile things? How do you get back? I mean, other things that were going on, like the Marshall Plan that was then being deployed in Europe, kind of in the immediate aftermath of World War II, of these were sure bitter rivals at the time, but now we are working to rebuild, is kind of one of those concurrent events going on. But I mean, there still was the fact of the matter that whether they were complicit, participating or not. We were talking about a regime that was very much opposed to, well, many aspects that people like to hold near and dear nowadays about what American society is. But, of course, the way it was at the time is more complicated than any kind of retelling or mythologizing can really do justice to.
Yeah, I would say the more provocative part of the title actually is the subtitle, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. And so I'll just address that because I get questions about it. And I hear a lot of people ask like how I can call children Nazis. And I just want to say that I say very early on in the book, I don't call them Nazis in the book. But to call them Germans would be disingenuous because that's not why they were here. That's not how they were invited here. They were invited here because of their father's service to the Third Reich. And the deal we made with them was despite that complicity. And this book is really about white supremacy here in the United States and the way in which it gets baked into our school systems and the ways in which our schools propagate it in many ways. And so that complicity to me, which is really here about American complicity with a lot of those values and the ways in which these scientists and their families were warmly welcomed, not just tolerated, but treated better than other El Paso citizens, Mexican-American El Pasoans, is key to the book. And so I would just want to bring attention to that from the title.
Yeah, okay, fair enough there. Yeah, the subtitle is decently provocative there as well. So a lot of ideas to be explored within this. How did you end up coming about wanting to delve into this issue? What first sparked your interest in it?
Actually, this might be a place to go to an image if you want to, which is the image that looks like it's from a newspaper. It's in the middle of your stack there. Yeah. So it was seeing these photos, coming across these photos, actually in another local history publication, but then I found them in their original site. These are photos of paperclip children and other Anglo-American children playing at Crockett Elementary, which was the school that took in the greatest number of the scientist children. So I'll just back up and say that the scientist families lived behind barbed wire in old hospital barracks on Fort Bliss. And the children actually left base far more often than their parents did. They left it daily. They were bused by military police to El Paso public schools every day. Their mothers left far less frequently. And their fathers had a little bit more reason to leave than their mothers. But the children interfaced with the American public the most by a great deal. And those photos, if we could just look at them again real quickly for viewers who can see them, did really important PR work from the very early when the children were here. The captions are illegible, even to me from here.
I can see a couple of them here. On the one on the right, it shows 3 boys, and it says German boys quickly learned American games, and then naming a couple of them here, and names I am not going to attempt at this point in time, but it's saying await their turn at marbles with Fred Nations, native Texas, as he takes his shot. So it's a native Texan, rather. And then on the left showing a similar-ish situation for girls in this case, saying which girls are German and which American. Being put there with Crockett Elementary visible in the background. Right.
So these photos were, real important to me for a couple of reasons. First, they revealed the ways in which the welcoming of the scientist children wasn't just natural but orchestrated, which is to say that the military and possibly the El Paso schools put the press to work, right? That both of these photos and the captions are arguing they're just like us. And that was a really important message that the children were used to repeat and articulate frequently in the beginning days of the operation. Really, not just the beginning days, the entire 3 years that they lived here in El Paso before they were relocated. So that intrigued me, and that was one of the ways in which I started. The photos are important in one other way too, which is who does not make it into the photos, which are Mexican-American students who comprised well over half of the El Paso school population, right? Everyone in those photos is white. And that was a true reflection of the Crockett Elementary School population, but it wasn't a true reflection of El Paso schools. And that starts to get at the nature of school segregation and school inequity here in El Paso at the time.
Again, guest right now is Jonna Perrillo, the full professor of English education at the University of Texas at El Paso here, and again, author of the book that we are discussing today, Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. So we're going to be talking further with her about this, but we got to take that first break of this hour right now. So coming out of this break, delving further into this subject, some of the different aspects of it, and of course, getting eventually into some of those through lines to today. So stay tuned for more here on the El Paso History Radio Show after this break on News Radio 690 KTSM.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show streaming on Facebook, where you can find archived radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Gibbon-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archived pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Donovan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Donovan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152. M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on Saturday mornings on our YouTube channel, El Paso History TV. Go to youtube.com/El Paso History TV for archives of the El Paso History Radio Show. Also on that YouTube channel, you can see for free.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing on News Radio 690 KTSM in this pre-recorded episode. We are, of course, the El Paso History Radio Show on Facebook. You can go there for our weekly promo announcements for all of our upcoming editions, and, well, further discussion you can see on them, of course, over on the site. Also, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/El Paso History TV, where you can find, well, of course, these streams, as well as the entire catalog of the El Paso Gold DVDs, covering more than the last 20 years of history production in town, uploaded for free for your viewing pleasure, plus the more recent 20 ABC7 TV series from El Paso History TV featuring Bernie Sargent, and I was often behind the camera there. Of course, an important reminder to support some of our advertisers and sponsors, including Pepe's Restaurant in Cañutillo, is back open for the year and, of course, open for in-house dining. If you want to find them at 6761 Donovan Drive, you can also give them a call at 915-877-2152. That's 915-877-2152. We'll definitely be going out there after the program today, after it airs, as well as maybe some special guests, shall we say. And then, of course, it is the home of the one and only margarita, and also the continuation of the great old Griggs recipe, still being made new. Food is new, recipes are classic, and you can get a lot. I like the chili randos every time I go out there. As for the Croom special, that's the one I end up doing more often than not. But of course, joining us back here in studio right now, we do have Jonna Perrillo, the professor of English education at the University of Texas at El Paso, and of course, author of the book that we are discussing today, Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. Thank you very much for sticking around with us here.
Thank you.
So the one thing, we have some pictures that we have been bringing up of demonstrating some of from the time frame that we're talking about, pictures taken at the time of the schools. And there's one that we wanted to at least make sure to bring up here at this point that you kind of mentioned about the stark differences between the way the schools were comprised and who was attending what, essentially. So we have on this picture on the left-hand side, we have the first grade class at the Mexican Alamo Elementary, 1947, and on the right, the first grade class at the American Crockett Elementary, 1947, with your captions here. And do these appear in the book as well?
They do appear in the book, and they're easier to see.
A little bit better, but you can kind of get the idea of it here. I mean, small-ish class sizes. Looks about the same as when I was going to school anyway. But like you said, the composition of who was attending these schools is kind of the major point you're wanting to focus on there, right?
That's right. So, yeah, we can see that every student in the Alamo picture is Mexican-American, and the students at Crockett are largely white. If there were Mexican students attending Crockett, they're more likely to be paying Mexican national citizens who would cross the border and pay to attend El Paso public schools than they were to be Mexican-American, El Paso born.
So as opposed to, and that's kind of a stark juxtaposition to be brought from today. I mean, sure, there are private schools, the whole, charter school thing and things like that going on in the modern day. But for the public school system, anyway, it's kind of a where you live, what you're close to calculation, at least in the modern day. And that is essentially, given also the factors of what's going on with Operation Paperclip and the families there and the busing out of military confinement, so to speak. That was essentially the system, the way it exists today, is not what was going on back then.
Well, yes, although I'll say actually today students are more likely not to be going to their local public school because we have school choice. And so I think actually far more students ride on a bus today to go to a school that is not their zone school than would have been then. So they were a product of residential segregation. Paperclip students were unusual, and that the first 2 years that they lived here, there was no school on base. So they were bused, but they were bused entirely to Anglo schools. And I'll just say, one thing that I think is really important that El Pasoans of a certain generation here will remember is that Mexican-American schools were called Mexican schools. Both here in El Paso and across the Southwest, that was just the parlance. And Anglo schools were called American schools. And I just talk about that in the book in terms of what that tells us about how students were seen at both of these schools, to what degree they were seen as full citizens or not, right? That if you were white, you were American, but if you were Mexican-American, you were just Mexican. And that starts to also get at the other kinds of inequities that were a product of school segregation, which is just how schools saw the students in their midst and their responsibilities to the students in their midst.
I think at least one story that you get into here that I will get more into in future segments. Sorry, I got to take that next break. But essentially, treatment of the Spanish language, among other things, was very much a part of it as well. That I've had conversations with people about how that was reacted to. But we'll get more into that here in the coming segments. Again, Jonna Perrillo, full professor of education at the University of Texas at El Paso, guest right now again, and author of the book that we are discussing, Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. So stay tuned. We got to take that next break right now. Coming out of this, talking more about the subject here and, the many different facets of it. So stay tuned for more on the El Paso History Radio Show here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show, streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Gibbon-Bainey, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archived pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Donovan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Donovan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152. M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History Radio Show also streams.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Of course, I want to mention some of our other great partners in talking about and promoting different aspects of local El Paso history and of the larger region as a whole, including, of course, the great group over at Celebration of Our Mountains. Now, of course, it does focus on the mountains and have a lot of trips, tours, trail hikes, those kind of things, but often off just the physical landscape in our region as a whole, including, well, if you already are hearing this broadcast right now, you missed on the start of the See the Waco Tanks Pictographs tour that they have going on today, but they've got more stuff going on throughout the rest of the month and often the rest of the year as well, including a January 14th visiting of the footprint in the lava fields near Aden Crater, and even later on the Los Murales de Segundo Barrio, and other trail hikes. So it's a great time to be out and about, and particularly hiking with the weather often that we have around here. So check them out, celebrationofourmountains.org, or just search that very long phrase in your search engine of choice, Celebration of Our Mountains, and you can find them and again see what events they got coming up or how even to get involved with it. But again, joining us back here in studio right now, we do have Jonna Perrillo, professor of English education at UTEP, and of course author of the book that we are discussing today, Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. And so this is a story that is surrounding what we've been talking about, Operation Paperclip, but very much on the kind of visceral and personal level of then how a facet of day-to-day life was then lived, because you both get into, well, what the actual conditions were for those part of Operation Paperclip, but then also how that was juxtaposed with the way things were essentially already going, particularly when it comes to the education sphere in our region. And so we were, of course, talking about some of the ways that things were structured differently. And so even the way that it was beyond individual schools, the literal map of the way these things were put together is pretty significant as well, right?
Absolutely. So I'm sure all of your listeners know that African Americans at this time were segregated by state law,
right?
Jim Crow law, and went to the Douglas School for their entire education, K through whatever, as far as they got 12. Things worked a little bit differently for Mexican Americans because Jim Crow law didn't apply, and yet segregation was still severe.
Right.
And so one of the most interesting finds, I think, for me as a historian who has studied segregation for decades, was finding that local zoning policies actually made sure that took over and made sure that Mexican American English students were segregated. And I actually found it in just an employee manual from 1946. And what it said was, I mean, this map is super hard to read, but I think El Pasoans know kind of what it looks like. This is a map of all the schools that existed in the district at this time.
Yeah, so this is from, I don't see the exact date on here, but an early-ish, from modern standpoint anyway, map of the El Paso Independent School District.
Yeah, 1947, I believe. Somewhere in that top left corner, it says. It's hard to read, but it's either 1946 or 1947. So at the time that we are talking, this is a map of what the schools look like at the time that we were talking about.
And a couple of recognizable landmarks on there would be like the El Paso airport off to the right side of it. Of course, the international border between, downtown and South El Paso, and Ciudad Juarez, the Rio Grande features prominently there. And you can kind of see what I believe is trailing up there. Looks like Mesa Street before that was really developed much. So you can kind of see some of the major landmarks, and of course going up along before you hit like Fred Wilson and where the former Beaumont Hospital is, and kind of, I think it's McKelligan Canyon up at the very top of it, that little squiggle line there. So it recognizable for anyone who's familiar with the El Paso map pretty immediately.
Totally. Actually, what I think is so fascinating, well, I think there are a lot of fascinating things about this map, but the landmarks are the refinery, Fort Bliss, and Asarco. And I think for a school map, that's super interesting, right? That these are the things that surround our school district. But also it's making an implicit argument about the relationship between schools and industry that are important in the book otherwise. So that's just a tangent, but I've never seen a school map actually that looks like that from anywhere in the country. Interesting point. Okay. But there's a line in that map that divides South El Paso from the rest of El Paso. Right. And if you could see it more closely, you can see just how crowded in some ways South El Paso is, and how many schools there are, and yet they only feed into one high school, Bowie, which was created early, 2 decades before this, by Mexican American parent demand. But the important thing, I guess the point that I want to make here, is that the transfer policy said this. It said if you were Mexican, you could transfer from north of the line to south of the line. If for some reason you lived in North El Paso, right, what we call El Paso, you could transfer to a school in South El Paso, but only if you were Mexican. If you were Anglo, you could, and somehow lived in South El Paso, you could transfer to schools north of the line, but only if you were Anglo. So this is an explicitly racialized school zoning policy that is meant to actually make sure that schools are even more segregated than housing in El Paso. So we often think of school segregation at this time for Mexican Americans as simply a product of residential segregation. But this document showed that there was a real effort to make schools even more segregated if possible. And that is because of the other kind of inequities that were taking place in the schools and the ways in which schools were preparing Anglo children to serve one role in society, and for Mexican and Mexican American students to serve another role.
Yeah, it's often said that the schooling systems of the point of time and the way that they were organized was around towards essentially industrialized labor to get them used to, bell schedules and staying in line and conformity, rather than necessarily creativity being one of the major parts of it. And those criticisms sometimes come through even to the modern day, of course, depending on where you're looking at it. There was a conversation, had the opportunity to be on some of I forget the name of the effort, but when it was that like El Paso Independent School District modernly was looking at kind of revamping, reimagining, I think it was like Reimagine EPISD or something along those lines called it. That was something that they explicitly brought up, the idea of getting, or at least modifying or adjusting and making more relevant the industrialized school system policy. So that is very much something that can still be seen. I mean, why do desks sit in rows sometimes? I mean, that was my schooling experience. I've seen more modern classrooms where they're more like in small groups and it's not all about facing towards the front, but that has not necessarily, it hasn't always been the standard.
That's absolutely true. It's not even always the standard now, quite honestly. But there's a whole chapter in the book that deals on race and space in both El Paso, like as a civic structure, but also within schools. And you're absolutely right. Americans really prided themselves on having schools that looked very different from German schools. So during the sort of early years in the war, they would send groups of Americans over to help denazify German schools. And one of the things that they would come back with is like all of their classrooms are dark, they have a podium, they're bolted down to the floor, they're anti-democratic, these German classrooms, and we need to make them more democratic. But you're absolutely right that the American schools didn't always look that democratic either. So, for example, schools in South El Paso were overcrowded to a point that we can't even, I think, really conceive of now these days. Teachers were holding classes in hallways. They had several schools that had no cafeteria, had no library, where teachers were teaching. They would partition an auditorium into 4 and teachers were teaching 4 different classes in a single auditorium. This is what schools in South El Paso look like. Crockett didn't look like that. Schools in North El Paso simply didn't look like that. And so there's a total difference of resources. There's a total difference of ideology. And you're right, it was absolutely tied to the economy. So if, again, back to that school map, there were however many elementary schools in South El Paso and a single high school. None of these schools were actually running full day sessions. Students were often attending them for part of a day in rotation so that they could serve all of the students that they needed to.
Okay.
Right? So it's not even in the most basic way equal education access. But
the whole separate but equal concept that had been elaborated previously by Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, which Texas fought tooth and nail.
Of course.
And so they weren't even attending school as much as Anglo children. And then the reason why one high school could serve all of those elementary schools is because there was no real effort to require Mexican American students to attend high school at all. There was such significant drop off in students. If you look at the number of Bowie students who attended college in these years, and I have it in the book, I think it's 1 or 2. That tells us so much about what you were saying in terms of what school's for, who's supposed to go to college, who's supposed to be learning how to be a worker. Much of the curriculum in these Southside schools was highly vocational, right, and industrialized education. And I show that in more specific ways, and we can probably talk about here.
Yeah, we'll have to get into that here in a future segment. Got to take that next break right now. So, again, coming out of this break, still going to be talking with our guest here, Jonna Perrillo, the professor of English education at UTEP. And, again, I'm talking further about her book, Educating the Enemy, that we're going to continue focusing on through the second hour of the program as well. So, got to take that break right now. Stay tuned for more on the El Paso History Radio Show here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Gibbon-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archive pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Doniphan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the Juan and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Doniphan near Loop 375. Call 877-2152. M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. A lot of stuff we're talking about here today on the program, but of course want to mention some of our other great partners, including Rick Kern's music podcast, Talk and Rock Radio. You can, of course, find them at talkandrockradio.com, focusing on some interesting different aspects of El Paso's history, often the musical kind. Of course, Rick having previously produced and put on the Border Legends tour, before, that I also got the opportunity to have a hand in on the production on the back end of, and quite the interesting way that it was put forth in remembering, you could call it the golden age of rock and roll, or just a real heyday of some of the local bands in El Paso as well. But again, some of his remembrances and his experiences from time in the industry and etc. talkandrockradio.com is where you can find him. And of course, some of our other great sponsors of the program, including Patrick Total, Coldwell Banker Heritage Real Estate. Call 915-588-1850. That's 915-588-1850. Patrick is an excellent realtor. Him and his team are the reason I'm in the house that I am in right now. So go to him for El Paso homes for sale or rent. Again, 915-588-1850. But again, joining us here in studio right now, as we have had this hour, and well, next hour as well, Dr. Jonna Perrillo, Professor of English Education at the University of Texas at El Paso, and again talking about the book, The Educating the Enemy, teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. And of course, you do have a copy of your book here with you right now, and there was a passage I think that you wanted to read to kind of encapsulate some of the subjects we've been discussing so far this hour, right?
Yeah. So I mentioned that I interviewed about 20 former paperclip children. I interviewed a number of Mexican-American El Pasoans as well. So this just sort of illuminates how some people think about the policy that I was just talking about in segregation. The policy was fought by some Mexican parents, such as those of Genevieve Drager and Elena Ruiz, who petitioned for their daughters to attend El Paso High School instead of Bowie. But even though Mexican-American students constituted a substantive minority of the school population at El Paso High, the expectations for Anglo and Mexican students were different. For Ruiz, there was never any talk by teachers of her attending college, as there was for her Anglo friends. Bill Rodriguez remembers El Paso High somewhat differently. He found it easy to fit in as long as a person was middle class, but the few poor Mexican Americans seemed not to mingle, as a quote. Rodriguez also discovered that when he requested to transfer to Austin High School, he wasn't admitted because Austin, located in one of the city's most solidly Anglo neighborhoods, was a little bit more ethnic-oriented. These dynamics applied to elementary school as well. Gonzalo Rangel, who by his account was the first Mexican-American child to attend Mesita Elementary, remembered feeling included only until the afternoon school bell rang. Of his Anglo classmates, he recalled, I could be talking to them from the classroom to the gate, and they would be with me, and then as soon as we hit the outside, hey, what happened? Rangel's story, like other former students' accounts of not being invited to his Anglo classmates' social events or to their homes, reflects the way in which Anglo children understood their roles in upholding social lines and maintaining racialized spaces, even if they were willing to relax those lines in school. And from there, I actually tell an account of a parent group at Burleson advocating for school improvements, for those school improvements going to Mesita first, even after the Burleson parents were promised them, and Superintendent Huey, when the Burleson parents confronted him about this, calling them communists and leaving the room. So this small passage, I think, encapsulates so much of what was happening in El Paso schools, but also in how what happens in schools shapes the students who attend it, right? Their ideas about race, their ideas about their own sense of belonging or not belonging, and citizenship values. And that's really at the heart of the story that I'm telling in this book.
Which can certainly be, I mean, kids understand what they are presented with and what they see here. So that's something that we'll have to talk a little bit further as we get into the next hour of the program. Out of time for this one. Again, guest right now, Jonna Perrillo, a professor of English Education at the University of Texas at El Paso, again, talking about the book, Educating the Enemy. Further discussions about this and, you know, the not even beyond just the system that has existed, but how then the interaction with Operation Paperclip also exemplified it further. So stay tuned for more on that here on the El Paso History Radio Show coming up in hour 2 after this break here on News Radio 690 KTSM. Stay tuned.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Gibbon-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archive pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Donovan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Donovan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152.
M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on Saturday mornings on our YouTube channel, El Paso History TV. Go to youtube.com/El Paso History TV for archives of the El Paso History Radio Show. Also on that YouTube channel, you can see for free many other videos, documentaries, and lectures about El Paso area history at youtube.com/El Paso History TV. Additionally, watch a dozen TV documentaries about El Paso history for free there on our YouTube channel. This includes Legends of El Paso's Mountains, Gunfights of the Old West, El Paso's Waco Tanks, Mexican Revolution sites in El Paso, and 8 more TV documentaries produced by El Paso filmmaker Jackson Polk since 2001. And at youtube.com/El Paso History TV, you can watch for free 20 short videos we produced that were broadcast on ABC 7 KVIA TV newscasts. This series is called El Paso History TV and features Spanish missions and churches on El Paso's Mission Trail, plus the Guadalupe Mission in Juarez, Mexico. That church was built in 1659 and is the oldest known adobe building on the El Paso Juarez Valley. It still welcomes Catholic worshipers today. Go to El Paso History TV on youtube.com. You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Given-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archived pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Donovan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Donovan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152.
M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on Saturday mornings on our YouTube channel, El Paso History TV. Go to youtube.com/El Paso History TV for archives of the El Paso History Radio Show. Also on that YouTube channel, you can see for free many other videos, documentaries, and lectures about El Paso area history at youtube.com/El Paso History TV. Additionally, watch a dozen TV documentaries about El Paso history for free there on our YouTube channel. This includes Legends of El Paso's Mountains, Gunfights of the Old West, El Paso's Waco Tanks, Mexican Revolution sites in El Paso, and 8 more TV documentaries produced by El Paso filmmaker Jackson Polk since 2001. And at youtube.com/El Paso History TV, you can watch for free 20 short videos we produced that were broadcast on ABC7 KVIA TV newscasts. This series is called...
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Of course, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Jonna Perrillo, Professor of English Education at the University of Texas at El Paso, and her book, Educating the Enemy. But first, we start off hour 2, as we usually do, with a history moment produced by documentary filmmaker Jackson Polk, talking this week about the Old County Jail.
The old El Paso County Jail in Socorro, Texas, was built about 1850, with walls of adobe bricks and cottonwood logs surrounding 2 steel cell blocks. It served as El Paso County's official county jail from 1850 to 1866, and again from 1868 to 1873, when San Elizario was the first and then the third El Paso County seat. It housed both the El Paso County Jail and the El Paso County Courtroom. According to legend, William Bonney, also known as the famed outlaw Billy the Kid, freed the only man ever to escape from this jail, his cohort, Melquiades. Records from that time were lost in a courtroom fire, but the story has been told and retold over the decades, so it has become historic narrative. The jail was recorded as a Texas Historic Landmark in 1970, and there are tours available of the old El Paso County Jail Museum, located in the San Elizario Historic District. An interpretive heritage museum on the town plaza features exhibits explaining the historic areas of San Elizario, including the jail and courtroom. Both museums are operated by the San Elizario Genealogy and Historical Society. There are Billy the Kid breakout shows presented by an Old West reenactor group called Los Pistoleros de San Elizario. Check with the museum when planning a visit. Also, ask about other events like an art market and musical performances that are often scheduled on the plaza at San Elizario. Call 915-851-1682. I'm Jackson Polk with this history moment for the El Paso History Radio Show.
Now, of course, we also take this moment to mention some of our other great partners in promoting local El Paso history and making it accessible. Specifically, of course, Barbara Given-Bainey, the operator of the great Facebook group Remember in El Paso When. You can go there for archive pictures galore and also the promos that we put out there, and more discussion on them this week, including one I saw specifically mentioning someone that they knew that was part of Operation Paperclip, as well as the family around them, and particularly how they presented themselves publicly, as well as the work that was going on in the background. The group has more than 33,000 members, and it's no mean feat to keep such a large group on task and on track, and not full of spam. There's a lot of other ones out there that I've experienced that have not had such good administration. So they do ask that if you are using their pictures, the administrators have worked hard in researching the pictures with our history attached. So please give credit to the site. And of course, those that are running, including affectionately known as BGB, Barbara Given-Bainey, and admins Rick Duncan, Rick Nahara, Margaret D. Smith, and moderators Ben Vincent, and more. They're always looking for a few more good hands and keeping the group on track. So find them again. Remember in El Paso When, over on Facebook specifically, where you can also see this show being streamed as it is airing today. But again, joining us back here in studio, we are, of course, joined by Jonna Perrillo, the English education professor at the University of Texas at El Paso, and, of course, author of the book Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. And something that's very critical to note that I realized that we hadn't yet is mentioning that this book is available locally, including not too far down the street from us here at Literarity Bookshop, right?
That's true. He's got signed and unsigned copies.
So you can see that there. It's, I don't have the address offhand. Let me look it up for a second here, but it's further down Mesa. It's in the Pepper Tree Square, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizable area for anyone who's been in that region. But of course, the subject of the book that we're talking about here, it's through the kind of lens of what was going on with Operation Paperclip and specifically the children coming from it. But of course, as we've been talking about, delve further into kind of the education system, both as it was and kind of juxtaposing with as it is now in both, of course, our region, but more largely in the kind of Southwest in general. And one of the stories that has been relayed to me previously is how that, regardless of which school was being attended, the way that the Spanish language was often treated in El Paso schools, it would be, if you hadn't lived it, it would almost sound fantastical from this point in time. Like me imagining that happening in a school in this day, someone being punished for speaking Spanish. I mean, it'd be one thing to be like cursing at someone in Spanish, but it's another thing to just for the existence and mentioning the language overall, the fact that there were physical punishments that were often put into place. I've had people tell me stories of that for years.
Yeah, this is something that when I give talks often resonates with audience members of a certain age, or just family members of people who grew up in El Paso at this time, right? But it's not the kind of thing that many El Pasoans need to read a book to learn because they know it through lived experience.
Right.
But yeah, what you're referencing is that, first of all, the great majority of Mexican-American students in the city came to school speaking almost no English because of the segregated nature of their lives, more largely, and of their parents' lives. So it was a real issue that they really weren't proficient in English when they came to school. And then, as you said, they were punished corporally for speaking Spanish in school. They were beaten. They were given demerits. They were locked in closets. All these kinds of things that are really painful and really painful memories for many El Pasoans now. This was really different than the ways in which German students were treated for speaking German in school. And I talk about that in the book.
So, of course, again, just to reframe here, of course, putting through the frame of Operation Paperclip, the effort that was done to bring over the, ex-Nazi scientists, or at least ex-serving the Nazi regime scientists, primarily in the rocket and missile space. Let's call it rocket for simplicity, because missiles weren't really good. The guided nature of it wasn't really a thing yet, because even the V2s, as impressive as they may have been, were ballistic, literally. They were fired on a trajectory, and they would hit where that trajectory is, and it was not a guided kind of mission. That part came later in the space race, but that was the focus of it. But of course, then the families and the children that came along with them can't just be, left alone. They were educated. And so some of those circumstances also of the kind of juxtaposition of them going into these schools and how they were treated from them, and then where they were being brought from. We kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier about how they would be coming from, well, essentially military barbed wire encampments is where they were being housed, at least initially, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, I'm not sure. This isn't something that I could prove or found any documents to prove. Mm-hmm. But I will say that there were out of the 144 children who came from Germany as part of Operation Paperclip, something like 5 of them were older than elementary school age. Mm. And that I can prove. But what I can't prove is that was purposeful. My sense is that one of the issues here was trying to get children who had not experienced Hitler Youth and who themselves hadn't been part of the Nazi regime in very organized ways. Anyway, most of these children had experienced some schooling in Germany, but not much because of their age. They also didn't speak English. A lot of the scientists didn't speak English, right, and their mothers did not speak English. And so they had a lot in common with many El Pasoans in the sense that they started school not speaking English. Mm-hmm. But when they got here, they were 3 El Paso teachers were recruited over the summer to offer them their own little English schools to teach them English and get them up to speed for the fall. Mm-hmm. And the way that worked is they were given ice cream for not speaking German. And other kinds of prizes. The children really remember the ice cream, in part because they hadn't had it during the war. Yeah, and were also affected by the war, not in the same ways that all other German children were, but in ways. Yeah, sure. They experienced deprivation. So that made a really big impression on them. So it was a system of sort of reward versus punishment, which is the way in which Mexican-American students were assimilated into speaking English.
And so again, the different schools that we were talking about them going into and the way that they then progressed through it. We had talked a little bit before about the different concepts of the actual classrooms themselves that they were getting put into the Operation Paperclip children, and how there was, even on the blurb of your book, mentioning the power of the democratizing factors of American schools. Because even as you may think about the segregation that was present there, even within kind of German society, both pre-war and of course during the war, there was even further like social stratification that was kind of going on there, I think, is part of what you get into.
Yeah, so I mean, the school segregation is about social stratification, right?
Further.
So I mean, this gets messy with the language issue. I'll just say one more thing about
Fair
the
enough.
Mexican American students, and then get to your question. So Mexican American students were placed into schools where they were surrounded by other Mexican American students, by Anglo teachers who didn't speak Spanish, because very few of them did, and I show that even many who did study Spanish said they felt very uncomfortable, like they had learned Spanish academically,
Okay.
and often in a pretty compressed amount of time. That was really different than these children who spoke Spanish as their lingua franca, right, as their first language. But anyway, so there's this real division there. But they were put into schools where almost everyone spoke Spanish and then punished for speaking Spanish. By contrast, the German children were obviously going to schools where everyone spoke English and they were surrounded by English socially, academically, right? But then they became an important argument for the democratizing nature of American public schools. And they did a great deal of work for the American schools. So just one quick example that comes to mind immediately is those newspaper pictures that we looked at early on. Part of that article, a reporter talked to the children and said, "What's your favorite part of attending school in the United States?" And they found a number of kids who said, "Speaking the Pledge of Allegiance," or they probably didn't use the word reciting. I'm sort of paraphrasing here.
Okay.
Right. And so, in other words, there were these performances of Americanness that were, that the children, if they said that, and I assume that someone actually said that, they're registering that these are important performative aspects of democracy, right? To say the Pledge of Allegiance is to look American. Do I really believe that anyone found that to be their favorite part of the school day? I doubt it, because what they told me was it was playing on the playground. You know, it's the same things that was everyone else's favorite part of the day. But I recount in the book, so there are ways in which going to school looks American, like looks democratic, fitting in and assimilating at school, playing jacks on the playground, looks social, looks happy, looks industrious, looks like the ways that white Americans like to think of themselves. And then these German children also looked physically the way that white Americans like to think of themselves. They were well dressed. They were, highly disciplined. They fit in, by and large. And so this all became really important. But the German children, the Paperclip children, talk in ways that I record in the book about now seeing how they were promoted and they were given the benefit of the doubt. So there's one person, Walter Chinkel, who is responsible for actually a lot of the photos in the book and became just a really important resource and source for me and helped me to write this book and his generosity and what he would share. But he remembered saying, like, we weren't all smart, but we were all treated and believed to be smart, treated as if we were smart because of the group that they were part of, right? Because that their parents were professional and that they were white and that they were famous.
Yeah, and the scientists that had a lot of expectations on them.
Yes. And even in a memoir that I quote from, an unpublished memoir, but that one of the children wrote for his family that his wife shared with me. So he unfortunately passed away before I even began the book, right? So he had nothing to gain in writing this for his family. Talks about reading a textbook out loud to his class and how the teacher had the entire class cheer for him, right? Every word that he could point to, that she could point to, he could name. And the kind of response that he got from this. So there was just a lot of energy put into both arguing that these children seemed American, but also treating them as if they already were.
Interesting. So again, just right now, Jonna Perrillo, the professor of English education at UTEP and author of the book that we are, of course, discussing here, Educating the Enemy. That is, of course, available at Literarity, as I want to further mention to make sure that make up for lost time there, down too far down the street from us here. But got to take that next break right now. So continue our discussion about some of the other aspects of this and maybe some more passages as well coming up in this next segment. So stay tuned for more here on the El Paso History Radio Show on News Radio 690 KTSM.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Gibbon-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archive pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Doniphan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Doniphan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152.
M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on Saturday mornings on our YouTube channel, El Paso History TV. Go to youtube.com/El Paso History TV for archives of the El Paso History Radio Show. Also on that YouTube channel, you can see for free many other videos, documentaries, and lectures about El Paso area history at youtube.com/.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. Of course, I want to mention some of the things we got coming up for you in future episodes of the program, including specifically next week on the show, going to be talking about the Texas Master Naturalist Program, and the president of the Trans-Pecos chapter, Joseph Arteaga, will be joining us here along with some guests to talk about the program, the way that it helps turn you into, for lack of a better term, a professional volunteer, particularly for some of the natural and historical spaces in our area, and the in-depth curriculum that it ends up doing here, and, well, how it can help you have a much deeper understanding of not even just the history, but also the natural aspects and the physical environment all around us here in the borderlands. So stay tuned for that next week on the program. And, of course, you can also mention some of our great sponsors here, including Mission Del Rey Southwest, a great place to go with either out-of-town visitors or just yourself, particularly if you're looking for the literal and figurative, decorative ways, flavor of the Southwest. They have a great selection of souvenirs, jewelry, gifts, and decor items, and you can find them at their 12,000 square foot showroom on Lee Trevino and at the intersection with Pelicano. Mention the El Paso History Radio Show for a discount. Give them a call at 915-440-2140. That's 915-440-2140. But again, joining us here in studio, we are, of course, joined by Dr. Jonna Perrillo, the professor of English education at the University of Texas at El Paso, and again, author of the book Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. And there's a lot that goes into that whole kind of, again, the subtitle, the provocative way that you have it there, and the concepts that were both being promoted. I mean, the promotion of it aspect, I mean, the reason it was put into like newspapers and the way you discussed it there was a, kind of championing both the idea of the American system, the outcoming of the, World War II as a, defeat of them, and therefore, the assimilation. I mean, there's a whole lot of concepts that go into it, but you have one, among many other characters that you peruse in the book, you have a very interesting one to both understand and polarizing in a way, right? Including some of those that came over as part of the Operation Paperclip families.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're talking about Ilse Axter. She was the wife of one of the scientists. She was also a somewhat renowned Montessori teacher in Berlin until Hitler shut down Montessori schools, and then she went to work for the Nazi Party. She was an incredibly ambitious careerist woman at a time when this was somewhat unusual in Germany as well. Not somewhat, it was unusual in Germany as well as it was in the United States. She fought to control the Montessori movement in Berlin, and part of that included demoting one of her competitors, who was a Jewish socialist woman who ended up dying in Auschwitz, Clara Grunwald. So she was a really difficult person. She was also a real threat to the operation because now we know names like Werner von Braun. We did then too, but most of the scientists, their names were unrecognizable to Americans. The New York Times was reporting on Ilse Axter on the front page, in part because Rabbi Stephen Wise had brought, and others who were protesting Operation Paperclip, brought attention to her and saying, oh, we didn't bring over ardent Nazis, because the War Department was supposed to have sifted out all of the sort of hardcore Nazis. Well, what about her, right? Because for women, there was no careerist argument as far as Germans and Americans made, right? Like no woman had to work. No woman had to do what Ilse Axter did, and they certainly didn't have to serve the Nazi Party in the way that she did.
So kind of not the arguments of just following orders, we're not applying that way, so to speak.
That's right. So she was incredibly controversial. She ended up, her family was one of the few that was denied American citizenship in 1955, and she and her husband eventually went, with their children, went back to Germany, with one of their two children, went back to Germany. But she's really important to me, and I write a full chapter about her in the book, because she is someone who seems very contradictory to us. She was really devoted to this progressive education movement, Montessori education. She had what were considered very enlightened or progressive ideas about children's development and about education itself, and at the same time held incredibly regressive views about race and society, views that I spoke with her grandchildren who now live in Austria and Germany. I interviewed them at length, attest, like very much sort of admit to, and in fact, like want that out on the record, that their grandmother and their grandfather, they'll add, were Nazis and believed in the kind of ethnic fundamentalist beliefs at the heart of Nazism, and in fact believe that not to excuse their grandmother, but she became sort of the center of blame and deflected blame from her husband in many ways. So this is not questionable what her beliefs were. But I try to sort of unpack how a person could hold these two different kinds of views, and how that can help us to reapproach what's happening in El Paso and American schools at this time, which is to say the parlance of the day was democratic education for democracy. And at the same time, schools looked deeply undemocratic. And it was largely white women on the front lines holding those policies down, right, and making schools operate. And complicit for whatever reason, either they believe those racialized beliefs themselves, and I quote teachers who do, or they just wanted to participate in one of the professions that was available to them as women at the time. They were part of the system. And in fact, in many ways, I think Ilse Axter is not as different as she looks. To us, and that we see people who in this country could say and profess ideas about democratic education and then fight to maintain segregated schools.
With kind of that implied asterisk on the statement, essentially here, like it's we're saying that yes, education for all or things like that, with a kind of unstated asterisk on the end of that statement. Some restrictions apply, kind of thing going along.
Right, like if you speak Spanish, I'll beat you. Those kinds of restrictions, right? Or wanting to work in a white school, wanting to teach in a white school, as many teachers did, because it was, there are better working conditions, smaller classes, better resources. Many of them, frankly, like the students better. I think she's an important part of the story, both in terms of what she tells us about Operation Paperclip and the politics around that movement, but also how she can help us to put into perspective a problem with progressive education and democratic education at this period that was global.
Absolutely here. So again, guest right now, Dr. Jonna Perrillo, professor of English education, and of course, author of the book that we are discussing today, Educating the Enemy. And we'll be talking more about that as we come back from this break. But so, of course, stay tuned for more here on the El Paso History Radio Show on News Radio 690 KTSM.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show, streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page, Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Given-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archived pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano, and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Doniphan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Doniphan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152.
M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850. Call him today.
The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on Saturday mornings on our YouTube channel, El Paso History TV. Go to youtube.com/El Paso History TV for archives of the El Paso History Radio Show. Also on that YouTube channel, you can see for free many other videos, documentaries, and lectures about El Paso area history at youtube.com/El Paso History TV. Additionally, watch a dozen TV documentaries about El Paso history for free there on our YouTube channel. This includes Legends of El Paso's Mountains, Gunfights of the Old West, El Paso's Waco Tanks, Mexican Revolution sites in El Paso, and 8 more TV documentaries produced by El Paso filmmaker Jackson Polk since 2001. And at youtube.com/El Paso History TV, you can watch for free 20 short videos we produced that were broadcast on ABC 7 KVIA TV newscasts. This series is called El Paso History TV and features Spanish missions and churches on El Paso's Mission Trail, plus the Guadalupe Mission in Juarez, Mexico. That church was built in 1659 and is the oldest known adobe building on the El Paso Juarez Valley. It still welcomes Catholic worshipers today. Go to El Paso History TV on youtube.com. You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show, streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Given-Baney, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archived pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Donovan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Donovan near Loop 375. Call 877-2152.
M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate. M1 EP manages apartments in El Paso and helps investors buy, hold, and sell property. See the website, m1ep.com. M1ep.com. To learn more about the many benefits and long-term appreciation, call 915-592-4549. 915-592-4549.
Many retired El Paso area homeowners don't know where to begin when it comes to downsizing and selling their home. Patrick Tuttle and his Legacy Home team follow a proven process to help retired homeowners sell faster and for more money. Call Patrick Tuttle at 915-588-1850 today and get your home sold faster and for more money. That's Pat.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show, airing in this pre-recorded episode on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Of course, I want to recognize some of our other great partners in promoting both this show and other important things going on in the borderland. El Paso Inc., El Paso's business journal. El Paso Inc. is available online or for home or business delivery. Find it online at elpasoinc.com, where you can also get your subscription. Many important and in-depth reporting stories about the business and other environments in our region. So again, elpasoinc.com, where you can find them. A couple of things I want to mention about events coming up this week, including, of course, at Concordia Cemetery coming up on Tuesday, January 10th. They will be doing a commemoration of the Gringos Curve massacre perpetuated by Pancho Villa's Villistas, who commemorated in a cemetery at 11:30 a.m. in the Masonic section and across from the L&J, the old place by the graveyard, of course, sponsored by the Concordia Heritage Association. Public is invited. To find information, give them a call at 915-241-6285. That's 915-241-6285. And then on Wednesday, January 11th at 6 p.m., the Southwest chapter of the Railway Locomotive and Historical Society will meet at Timo's Mexican Restaurant at 2000 Montana, talking about the Gringos Curve massacre and, of course, how that was, the history surrounding it. So again, that one, public also invited. More information there. Again, 915-241-6285, 915-241-6285. But again, joining us here in studio for our topic today, Dr. Jonna Perrillo, author of the Educating the Enemy book, and the subtitle of it there, of course, being Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. So there's a lot going on there, because as we were getting into, of course, the Cold War, the aspects of the culture clash and the mutual coexistence, or the phrase that has come up more recently again in the news about, but with the Cold War definitely developing, the focus on the scientists was absolutely there, but the way you are focusing on them about what was going on with the individuals, the students that were a part of this, part of the families, and of course culture ends up coming more than a little bit of part of this. We've talked about that and the different aspects about how the education system kind of existed at that point in time in our region and more or less in the Southwest, and then how this interaction came in. I mean, this very interesting juxtaposition of being brought over and bussed over from literal, barbed wire encampments into these schools and the different ways it was. But culture has always been a part of it, and so, of course, the democratizing aspects that we talked about previously, the way it was being promoted anyway from the American schools and how that was put forth. But you bring up an interesting point in the book about, well, essentially cowboys, right?
Yeah. So I look at two different parts of the curriculum. We already talked about one, language and language instruction, and then the other is the civics curriculum. And here I look in particular at a series of units that El Paso teachers wrote on cowboys and Indians as a way of teaching students both about history, or at least historical myths,
Sure,
and also citizenship values. And so this was a especially important part of their education that a lot of the German children, paperclip children, remembered in part because it was part of a larger initiative to Americanize these children. So so I'll just back up and say that Buffalo Bill, myths of the American frontier, all of that was incredibly popular already in Germany and had been for a long time.
Sure.
And their parents were big readers of books by a German author called Karl May, who basically wrote, myths of the American frontier as if he had been to the United States. In fact, he hadn't until a couple of years before he died. So they were, in a lot of ways, already they were playing cowboy and Indian in Germany, like American children were here. I talk about the scientists too, learning that they were coming to El Paso and being particularly intrigued and having a sense of expectation of what they would find, right? And thinking that they were going to the American frontier. And
the
so
Old West, so to speak.
Exactly. And so Fort Bliss and El Paso fit into this sort of cultural imagination that they had already established and had started to teach their children. So there are a series of photographs in the book that are of the paperclip children. I think one of the most interesting ones is, if people are looking at the slide, there's a picture in the bottom right of one of the scientists and his two sons dressed. These are the sealers. It's the boys' first day in the United States. All the fathers.
This was their first day.
Yes, and he greets them with these cowboy outfits. And they're standing in front of their barrack with their father in a suit looking kind of like Al Capone and the boys looking like cowboys, right? These two different kinds of American myths all at once. And so this is what their parents did to help make this place more familiar to them. And it was supported by the military, who showed the children Westerns in the cinema in Bavaria, where they were awaiting transportation to the United States. And then I also looked at Fort Bliss newspapers and saw how frequently Westerns were being shown at the cinema at Fort Bliss, right? So this was a huge part of their sort of process and imaginative life in coming to the United States, that was then supported by teachers in the school who taught not just the German children, but all children, both at American Mexican schools, stories about cowboys and Indians as a way of teaching them American values. And that curriculum went like this. The Indians are gone now, but they taught these Anglo cowboys all of their skills and values. They taught them how to live on the land. They taught them how to be industrious. They taught them how to be self-reliant. All of these premier American values, right? Ways in which Americans think of themselves and think of what good democratic citizens do. And taught them that in the civics curriculum through these myths of the frontier.
Interesting. Kind of having spent some time in schooling on the East Coast, the way there was, I mean, everyone's familiar probably with the story of, the first Thanksgiving and all that, but especially they got a little bit more into the idea of, Squanto and teaching the Pilgrims how to farm and how to survive those kind of things, a very similar way, but more regionalized in that kind of way, about, again, kind of an introduction to civics in its own way from a more youthful and culturally accessible standpoint, I guess would be a way to put it.
Yeah, and culturally in many ways, right? Like, this is foundational to American juvenile culture at this time, right? Everything that children are doing, from seeing films to TV, is all supporting these myths of cowboys and Indians. Absolutely. Like, there are these two things that are happening at once. This sort of like reification of Native Americans, of indigenous people, right, as holding these values, and this in making them invisible at the same time, right? Claiming that they no longer are here. So one of the things that was built into these units that the teachers taught were field trips, and they went out to ranches and they looked at how ranchers worked, and they met with ranchers. They did not go to the Tigua reservation, right? They meeting actual living Native Americans wasn't part of this, because that would just sort of challenge in many ways the narrative that was being told, which is that it is white Americans that are now the sort of progenitors of these values.
Interesting. So, I mean, yeah, there's still that popularity. We've even heard from people today. I mean, I've heard the name Karl May even before, getting familiar with your work and your book here because, yeah, it's kind of one of those weird quirks of history. We're talking about someone who has no personal experience with the subject, being in a limited way, I mean, within Germany, if you want to call that limited, being famous for putting out the topics of that area. It's kind of one of those quirks that you would think, like, wait, a random German guy is considered an authority on something that he has never experienced. Okay. So yeah, the way that the culture has then been shared, I've even heard from people that I went to school with that, yeah, no way, we love cowboys over there. And like they were essentially when they found out I was from Texas, were like holding off and being like, I was pretty sure you don't ride a horse to school, but just in case, do you? Like those kind of things that still even perpetuate to this day.
Yeah, I mean, Karl May was a crook. He was a perfect person to be authoring these kinds of books in a lot of ways. He embodied the role. And he did eventually come here. But Hitler loved him, encouraged through the Nazi teachers organization for teachers to teach him. He really was a foundational part of a German culture at this time and of sort of replicating these myths. And I think being very true to their values in many ways. The fact that he never came here didn't seem to make it particularly hard for him to capture the narratives and the stories of heroism and of white conquest, which was of great interest to Nazis who were trying to conquer the European continent.
I mean, yeah, the whole concept of colonization and taking over and, being through conquest, essentially. The rulers of an area was, I mean, literally the stated purpose of the whole concept of the 1,000-year Reich and all of that was, it wasn't just going to stick around because we're all such good buddies, essentially.
Right. I mean, Nazis are getting a couple parts of their ideology directly from the United States. One is this idea of conquest, right? They really look to what Anglo-Americans did to indigenous people throughout history as a model. And the other was the kinds of segregationist policy that we were talking about before. They called on Jim Crow. They read it, not just casually. They read it and studied it, and that became the basis of Nazi law and of law, particularly against Jews, right? And of segregation and of withholding civic life from certain citizens. They got that directly from the United States. So this cowboy piece is really important because it's going back and forth. It's informing both Anglo-Americans and Germans' ideas of each other. And the scientists said the same thing that you just said. They said, I came here and I thought I was going to see people with guns and hats and riding horses. And it was none of that. We're in a city. Werner von Braun called it a bustling metropolis. I'm not sure if that's, I guess it was, right? But yeah, they came here expecting to see a movie. And what they saw was El Paso.
Yeah, reality is often very different than expectations here. So, Toby, we've got to take that last break right now. Again, guest right now, Dr. Jonna Perrillo, professor of English education and, of course, at UTEP, and, of course, author of the book that we are discussing, Educating the Enemy, Teaching Nazis and Mexicans in the Cold War Borderlands. Wrapping up on that and bringing the show to a close. So stay tuned for more in this last segment here on the El Paso History Radio Show.
You are listening to the El Paso History Radio Show streaming on Facebook, where you can find archive radio programs. The El Paso History Radio Show also streams on the Facebook page Remember in El Paso When, run by Chief Administrator Barbara Gibbon-Bainey, known as BGB. Check out that page for thousands of archived pictures and videos of El Paso history. Remember in El Paso When on Facebook. Visit Mission Del Rey Southwest for a huge selection of El Paso souvenirs, decor, and gifts. Mission Del Rey features El Paso saddle blanket products and thousands of Southwest, Native American, and Mexico items, plus unique pottery, blankets, and turquoise jewelry. Bring your family and out-of-town guests to visit Mission Del Rey Southwest's large showroom at Lee Trevino and Pelicano and see their website at missiondelrey.com. 915-440-2140 for souvenirs, gifts, and decor. Mission Del Rey Southwest. Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina serves the old Griggs Mexican food recipes in a new location at 6761 Doniphan Drive. Enjoy great New Mexican food with cold beer and the one and only margarita from the cantina. The managers and cooks from the original Griggs restaurant serve tacos, combination plates, and sopapillas. Get the best Mexican food in the valley at Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant and Cantina, 6761 Doniphan, near Loop 375. Call 877-2152.
M1 EP Management Corporation is proud to sponsor the El Paso History Show. If you're tired of the ups and downs of the stock market, invest in real estate.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show. I've been your host, Andrew J. Polk, coming towards the end of the program here, but again, so we're joined in studio by Jonna Perrillo, Professor of English Education and at UTEP, and of course, author of the book that we have been discussing today, Educating the Enemy. So we've covered a lot of ground on, what Operation Paperclip was in brief and how that related to the arrival of these scientists and their families, specifically is what you're really delving into and using that as kind of a lens to explore what education was and how it was perceived, conceived, actually put forth within our region and again the Southwest and kind of the larger U.S. as a whole there. But there's a couple of topics that you further look into about kind of through lines to today about what the legacy is of this, right?
Yeah, so I'll just back up and say that when Raymond Tejas was elected the first Mexican-American mayor, not just of El Paso, but in the country in 1957, El Paso still looked a lot as it did a decade earlier. And he did a great deal to desegregate the workforce and some other aspects of El Paso civic life, but schools largely look the same. And we know that because when the Alvarado versus EPISD case went through the district courts and federal courts in the 1970s, they documented that. And so one of the things that I think about at the end of the book is, why do we have so much at stake in keeping schools segregated and unequal? Why was it harder to desegregate schools than the workforce? So that's that's something that I think nationally we continue to wrestle with. Schools are looked as segregated today nationally as they did at the time of the Brown versus Board of Education case. So they got better in the 70s and 80s, and then as federal law sort of as the Supreme Court knocked down case after case that the busing and other kinds of federal efforts that the U.S. government was putting forth to desegregate schools, they've gotten worse. Here in El Paso, that looks less like racial segregation because that would be so difficult given, our city is even more Mexican-American than it was in the 1940s. And so we just couldn't have schools that look like they did in the 1940s, but economically, they're still deeply segregated. And so I have a slide that I created. It's not in the book, but it's for talks that I give here. I've given a great number of talks in the city that just show, it compares the last census information by zip code, and I compare the Segundo Barrio to the rest of the city. And what it shows is that, I can't actually read the segments from here, but poverty is far, far higher in South El Paso still, and education attainment is far, far lower. Right? And so that's not the only economically challenged part of town.
But it definitely is a major one. I mean, the factor that I think about sometimes is that to this day that we have one of the poorest zip codes in the country is here in El Paso. Right. I believe it's the 79901 actually zip code. The parts of that are down there, I mean, the median income is very low. And as much as there has been a lot of work and focus on those in a lot of ways, and some of those things that maybe features of future shows, including debates about use of space in downtown and just south of downtown El Paso, are kind of wrapped up in this. And when I talk about that future, I mean, it can be kind of seen in ways about how, what hasn't changed, essentially, from the time frames that we're talking about.
That's right. Even if we're looking at less racially segregated schools, it doesn't mean that we're looking at equal ones. And it doesn't mean that the education that students are offered and the opportunities that they are offered within schools are all equal.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot of through lines that can be drawn, and the way that these conversations need to keep happening, because something that is not focused on often falls by the wayside here. So appreciate your time in speaking about that. Again, guest right now has, of course, been Dr. Jonna Perrillo, author of Educating the Enemy and UTEP professor of English Education. Thank you very much for talking to us about your book, about the history surrounding it, and just all the factors you even thought about to this day with us here on the show today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you all very much for joining us here for the El Paso History Radio Show. I've been your host, Andrew J. Polk. We'll be back next week on the program with a new show. Again, talking about the Texas Master Naturalist Program, and we'll head out to Pepe's right after this one. So thank you all for joining us. See you all next week.